You know, my first few cards included the Capital One secured card, the Capital One Quicksilver card, heck, even the Capital One 360 debit card. To which at that time, when I had no credit score, no credit limit, no credit history, I was just happy to get approved for anything at that point. And having now been removed about 4 or 5 years since getting the first Capital One credit cards, I'm starting to wonder, do I regret getting into Capital One credit cards in the first place? To which, like everything, the answer is, well, yes and no. Capital One nowadays is highly praised for their VentureX card being one of the most justifiable credit cards on the market, the Saver One being a better alternative to the Amex Gold card, or even Jennifer Gardner being a gardener and telling me I can use my VentureX business card for basically any purchase I want in life.
Hi, you might know me from my other job, but I'm a business owner too. Here at Once Upon a Farm, we chose the Capital One VentureX business card.
But also many moons ago, when I had around a 550 credit score, and I ran around to every department store known to man to try to get my first credit card, because my dad always told me that if I had a good credit score, I could buy anything I want in life with a good interest rate, a car loan, home loan, what have you. And there came to a time where JCPenney denied me, Santander Bank denied me, heck, even Sears denied me while they were going bankrupt. Like, if they didn't want me, nobody wanted me. But upon one of those times, walking into a Santander Bank, one of the bank managers there overheard me wanting to get a credit card, and he took me aside and set me down at his desk in this bank and basically told me, like, hey, there's this really cool website called NerdWallet, and essentially it gives you a whole understanding of credit cards, credit scores, and what makes sense for you in your life, and just how to learn about this whole game in the first place. To which I basically quickly blew that off because I could not understand it at that time, being, 19, 20 years old. But what I did find after talking to this guy is that there are cards called secured cards. And secured cards are essentially cards that allow you to put down a deposit, just like you would a car or a house, whatever, and they will give you that card, but with a preset spending limit, sometimes up to the limit of the deposit that you made, and sometimes a little more. At that time, this credit card, specifically the Capital One secured card, allowed me to put down a $49 deposit for a $200 credit line. And after researching a little more, I realized this was the card I absolutely needed. And basically, to my understanding at that time, if I got denied for the secured credit card, there was basically no hope for me whatsoever, and I was just going to stop trying. So what did I do? I went online, went through the entire application, and sure enough, I actually was approved for the Capital One secured credit card. I ended up depositing the minimum, which was a $49 deposit, and they did in fact give me a $200 credit line. And that was the catalyst to allow me to build up my credit score enough to the point where I was actually getting approved for, American Express credit cards, Chase credit cards, what have you, to where nowadays we have, 17 different credit cards we've gotten approved for in the last, few years. But here is where Capital One really gets you, right? So once you're first in their ecosystem, they want to keep you in their ecosystem as long as possible. That's just good business practices. But what they ended up doing was, after getting this card about a month later, they ended up sending me some mail like, oh, apply for the Capital One Quicksilver card. You get 1.5% back on everything. You're pre-approved. Having just got my first credit card and started building my score, I was like, whoa, I could start earning cash back? I could start earning something on all the spend anyway. I'm not just building my credit score anymore. To which, yes, I saw the pre-approval, and what did I do? Immediately got approved for the Capital One Quicksilver card. And now I was balling out, right? I'm earning 1.5% cash back on everything. Super happy days, especially at this time. And I believe at this time, this credit card ended up giving me about a $1,500 credit limit. But here is where hindsight is 2020, right? So now, having been removed and learning a lot about Capital One and the way they do things, what I didn't realize at that time was that I was bucketed. And what bucketing essentially means is that when Capital One actually puts you in their system for the first time and you get approved for their cards, they will create a box for you and they will say you have this income, this credit profile, and this is how much credit limits we're going to give you, and you're never breaking that, right? There's no system in place to where you're breaking out of whatever that was at that time. And maybe at once you had a 10K, income, and now it's 100K. Doesn't matter. We're going to keep you at the credit limit as if you were only making 10,000 a year, which reduces the amount of upgrading you're able to do, whether it's credit limits or to new cards, what have you, which pretty much disallows you to grow alongside Capital One. They want to keep you where you were when you first started. So in one way, I'm very, very grateful for Capital One, right? They gave me one of my first shots to allow me to build my credit score, whereas basically everyone else denied me, so no, I don't regret it on that half. But then the parts I do regret about getting into Capital One super early is as follows. So my first gripe was, well, they got me really, really young. And that sounds really, really bad in any other context, right? But stay with me here. So think about it. They got me before I knew anything. Before I know about bucket systems, before I know about welcome offers. So what did they do? When I got pre-approved for that Capital One Quicksilver card, I didn't even know that there were Quicksilver cards that allowed you to get, spend $500, get $200 back. I didn't know that there were welcome offers that you can actually earn some money on the spend that you were going to spend anyway. They wanted to make sure that within a month that I got Capital One cards before I got privy, they actually sent me this, so this way I had no welcome offer, nothing whatsoever. It was just, hey, you're lucky to have a card. Here's our card. Start earning 1.5% back, aka just start using our card, right? No welcome offer, nothing. Also, I've heard of some stories where some people were actually, for their first Quicksilver card, they didn't realize, unbeknownst to them, that they were giving them the Quicksilver 1 credit card, the worst credit card on earth. The one that gives you the same benefits as all the other Quicksilver cards, a 1.5% cash back, whatever, but there's a $39 annual fee attached to it. Like, the worst. The absolute worst. And all the research I've seen out there, it could be wrong, but there is no way to get out of the Quicksilver 1 jail of $39 fee for the rest of your life. You just have to cancel it. And if you're somebody who is really unfamiliar with the game, and maybe this is your second credit card in life, and you have maybe 5 years of history and you didn't realize they were a no annual fee system, well, you just shelled out all that money for the annual fee when you didn't have to, and now you're afraid to cancel because Capital One got you so early, and you don't want to ruin your credit score, right? Even though we know nowadays you cancel a card, and if it's a good standing, it stays on your credit report for 10 years. So really, canceling cards, aside from like utilization and limits, doesn't really have a big effect, especially when you have more and more cards. Secondly is they did me a little bit dirty. Capital One did me slightly dirty on this whole escapade with my Platinum card, right? I put down a $49 deposit. Now, in the terms, it actually states you're supposed to get back your $49 deposit, right? That's how it works. Did I ever get my deposit back? Yes. How long did it take? Well, I think I got it back last year. So like 4 years later, I got back my $49 deposit. So crazy. And some of you might be saying like, well, Anthony, you're supposed to ask for it, right? They're not going to do it automatically. To which I would reply 2 things. Number 1 is they did do it automatically, so they gave it to me in 4 years. Who knows why? I just forgot about it. And number 2 is my wife also has the exact same card. She also has the Capital One secured card. And she got that about a few months after I did. And she called the Chase reps and they said there's nothing they can do. We cannot manually from our end give you your $49 deposit back. It's impossible. It just has to be whenever Capital One decides to do it. So I'm like, that's a little scummy, man. She put the deposit down 4 or 5 years ago and she's still not entitled to it back, even though now she has 10 plus credit cards and we're done with Capital One, right? So it's like, what the hell? What is that? But then outside of that obscurity, there are other big facets as well, right? Like if you just decided to accumulate a few Capital One cards because they sent them to you as, pre-approval offers, you're now foregoing all of the Chase cards you could have also gotten during that same period that may be better fit for you. For example, the Chase 524 rule, right? We know the Chase 524 rule is that Chase will deny you for more than 5 cards in a 24 or 2-year period if you've already had 5 cards from any issuer. So for example, if I have 3 Capital One cards, 2 Amex cards, okay, now Chase is going to start denying me until 2 years goes by between any of those cards. But like for myself, when I first got started, I mean, my first 2 cards within a month of each other already jumped my 524 status up to 224. And, had I gone a little bit further with Capital One, I'm basically foregoing for the next 2 years all of the Chase cards that I could have gotten. Again, if I knew then what I know now. So I guess here is where I have 2 forks in the road and just my thoughts here, right? So number 1 is maybe I want to stick with Capital One, right? Maybe I like their savings accounts. Maybe I like the 1.5% cash back, even though there's a ton of other cards that give you 2% or more. But maybe my goal is to eventually get a Saver One card or maybe get a Venture X card. And I like to stay in that ecosystem because I like Capital One. I like their portal. I like the simplicity. I like the justification. I like all of that. Then cool. I think that makes a lot of sense. But then there's a second fork in the road that states like, you might have been able to do it differently. Like, 1, okay, sure, maybe you want to get the Capital One secured card to get started. That's cool. But I think there might be other options. I think there might be an option like maybe a Chase Freedom Rise and maybe start building that Chase ecosystem and that relationship so this way you can get a Freedom Flex, Chase Sapphire Preferred, or Reserve down the line, etc. So there's many different forks in the road you can take. It's almost like Pokemon and choosing your starter Pokemon. Like, do I want a Bulbasaur that's a Capital One secured card and then maybe as it grows up I can eventually get a Venusaur, aka the Venture X? Or do I want to start out with Chase, maybe a Chase Freedom Rise, which is maybe a Squirtle, and it goes up to a Blastoise, which is then, or Chase Sapphire Reserve, right? Who really knows? It's kind of choose your own adventure. But I guess in my mind, Capital One just seems to be a little bit more bipolar about things. It doesn't seem like anything's very linear, and it seems like there are some traps, so to speak, like the bucket systems and not being able to raise your credit limits, not being able to product change certain cards, or only getting offered to product change cards at random times for no given reason, getting denied for certain cards like the Saver One or the Venture X for really no reason whatsoever. also like the 3 hard pulls in most states that Capital One gives you just to get approved for any of those credit cards, whereas most of the other banks do 1 or 2. And at least in the north it's available, but in the south where I am now, there's no physical locations for Capital One banks. But again, most of the at least bad that I mentioned was only because I was young and unaware, and YouTube is a little bit more prominent nowadays in the credit card space than it was back then. And if you're someone that tends to just love Capital One, then my exact, growing up with these 2 cards actually would work out perfectly for you. So it really just depends on you. And again, it's choose your own adventure in this game, right? And that's just mainly talking about the past, but what about nowadays? Why am I avoiding Capital One cards nowadays, having been removed 4 or 5 years from the situation? Well, I outlined the 5 reasons in this video right here. So I hope to see you there. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you.